What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the quest to find the magic ingredient that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Joseph Allen, and we talk about meetings since he is a meeting scientist, and we speak about suddenly virtual and how to get back to normal and back to hybrid. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own note, why don't you visit workshops.org and download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy. Welcome on the show, Joseph.
Thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Yes, a meeting scientist.
Yes.
That's incredible. I think if I had known that this exists when I went to uni, I might have done that for sure.
Yeah, it's not existed for a very long time. You know, the interesting thing about meeting science is I'm a meeting scientist, and if I train a student, and I do train students, they often become, conversant in meeting science and sometimes meeting scientists themselves. But the reality is the science of meetings is a pretty young science, even though we've been doing meeting science for a very long time as a people, as humans. We've been meeting for ever since we started, coming out of our caves and interacting with each other. So it's just fascinating that it's only been since around 1986 when Helen Schwartzman wrote that book, The Meeting. As an anthropologist, she wrote that book, and that was kind of the first truly scientific look at the meetings. And it's been since then that the science has really kind of started to take off.
And I guess that since the pandemic hit, you became quite popular and busy.
Well, that's very true. It's kind of an understatement. It's interesting. For years and years, nobody really cared. I was a meeting scientist, when it wasn't cool to be a meeting scientist, I guess, right?
Call this trendsetter.
Yeah, I was a trendsetter. There we go. That's the word for it. Yeah, I mean, it was like night and day. In October, November, 2019, January, whatever. I was doing my work and I had no problem with it, right? I'm doing lots of different scientific studies, writing a lot, writing books and articles and so forth from an academic perspective because I'm a professor, right? And then COVID happens and we all suddenly are virtual and we're used to doing this face-to-face meeting. We're in a rut to some extent. And then in the face-to-face meeting, we're like, oh my goodness, we're meeting all the time and this is stressful and how do I make this better? And suddenly my phone starts ringing and my email inbox starts exploding and people are asking, how do we do this? I'm like, how do we make this better? What does the science say about it, right? And so it's been night and day, the difference between pre and now during / post COVID, hopefully, right?
Yeah, and before I ask you what science says about meetings and how to make it better, would you call yourself a facilitator?
Yes and no. So I have the skills and I've been trained and I know how to do facilitation. So I guess to some extent you could call me a facilitator. However, I primarily would be a doctor of meetings. I'm a meeting scientist. So rather than call me in necessarily to facilitate a meeting, although I could, right, because I have that skill set and I train people on how to do that, I'm more of a person who you would call in, sort of like you go to a medical doctor and you say, this, my arm hurts, or I've got a stuffy nose, or I've got, you describe your symptoms. I'm like that for meetings, right? So people would call me and say, hey, my meetings are not what they ought to be. How can I make them better? And I can either just tell them, here are the, top 10 best practices type thing, which I can do. But what's better is I'm more like a doctor where I come in and I observe and I say, okay, let me be a fly on the wall and see what the symptoms are, right? Let me see how things are going and then tell you, here are the things that I noticed from this meeting that could be done differently to make that meeting and future meetings like it better, right?
A proper diagnosis.
Yeah, but diagnose the problem, because the interesting thing about meetings is when people ask how to make them better, there's not a panacea. There's not a silver bullet. It's really a whole pantheon of things, and it's like symptoms. That's kind of the best way to describe it. Everybody can manifest a little bit differently when it comes to their colds or their flus or whatever it might be. Same thing with meetings. Some people are really good at making sure everybody participates, but they're not really good at maybe listening and right and incorporating
Sounds like a
their
dilemma.
participation, right? Or some people are really good at having an agenda, but they're not so good at following it. Or some people are really good at starting and ending on time, but they cut off really good ideas at the end, or they don't provide opportunities for small talk at the beginning. So there's all these different little things that together make meetings really, really effective, but everybody's got one or two things here where they're just derailing things and causing problems that make it worse.
And I think this is very interesting that some people might be very good in including people, but then they don't listen. Some people might be very good in providing an agenda, but then they don't follow it. So It sounds like a knowing-doing gap. So I know what I should be doing, but somehow I'm not doing it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the science of meetings is not rocket science. I guess is one way to describe it. I mean, it's not too complicated. Most of the things that I would suggest are like, oh yeah, duh, I should be doing that. And it's a no duh type of experience for a lot of people when you tell them try this or try that, because we oftentimes know what we should do. But as you said, this is a no doing gap. It's the doing which gets us tripped up.
So, and what gets in the way? Because I guess that you have a background in psychology, or psychology definitely plays a role in meeting science because it's about people and interaction and communication.
Yeah. So I am an industrial organizational psychologist.
Yeah.
And so what that means is I apply psychological theories and principles to the world of work. So you're absolutely right. It's the psychology that gets in the way. It's the habits. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you're used to a meeting being a certain way and following a certain pattern, when someone tells you, why don't you try this, you might try that thing one or two times. And maybe the first time it's like, wow, that really made a difference. The second time, like, oh, that made a difference, but whatever. And then the third or fourth time, we habituate back to whatever our schema or whatever our general mode of operating tends to be. So one of the biggest reasons why interventions around meeting science are tough to implement is because we're habit formers, and we keep to our habits, and that's true around our meetings. The second thing that is a barrier to adopting best meeting practices is we often see other people's meetings as being bad, but ours as being fine.
Of course, because we're the ones speaking most.
So it's a self-serving bias, right? Yeah. And so it's psychology 101 playing out in our meetings. We think, oh, we're amazing. And we go to these meetings, man, they really need some help with those meetings over there. But me, I'm wonderful. And so that problem makes it hard for meeting leaders to listen to the doctor of meetings or the meeting scientist or the best practices they might find from a book or from all the many different articles you'll see online about how to make your meetings better.
So what are the top 3 itches or pains that your patients come to you with? And what are your top 3 cures?
Yeah, so probably the first thing is overload. They've got too many meetings, right? And they're struggling to get all the other work done that they need to get done throughout the week or the month or whatever. And they've identified meetings as the thing that's keeping them from it. And they're oftentimes right. Some people are having 20, 30 meetings a week, and you're supposed to do, 40 hours of work, assuming they have other tasks besides meeting with people that they're supposed to do. That they're pulling 40, 50, 60 hours a week simply to keep up, right? So that's the first one. The second big problem that people run into with meetings is how to manage difficult personalities or difficult processes that emerge in meetings. Like, what do I do about, Bob, who every time I get in the meeting has to talk about this and goes on for about 10 minutes, right? And then the third thing is stale meetings. And what I mean by stale meetings is meetings that are on the agenda every week, and you go to them and they're the same thing every week, and nothing seems to go forward. Nothing seems to be moving, right? Stale meetings. They're the weekly stand-up meeting to that sort of thing, where they just become stale. There's more, right? There's lots more. But those are the 3 big ones that I see pretty common. And so the cures, for the meeting overload actually is making your meetings a little bit better. So it's interesting that if you actually improve your meetings, you'll have fewer of them.
Makes
right?
sense. Quantity
it makes
and
sense.
quality.
Yeah, it's fascinating because one of the things that we've found in the science is that one bad meetings causes several other meetings. And the reason that is if the bad meeting is unclear, we would leave the meeting thinking, I don't really know what happened there, or
Let's have a
what am
meeting.
I supposed to do with that, right? Then you go back to your boss, say, can we have a quick chat? Or you go back to, you have these one-on-ones, which are still meetings, to clarify what the heck just happened in that meeting, right? And so that fills up your calendar, especially now with virtual and not being in the same office, not being able to pop in and say, hey, what about this? It's now, hey, can I get 5 minutes on your calendar? Hey, can I get 10 minutes on your calendar? Hey, can I get, and that's what happens. So a bad meeting just explodes your calendar for the next day or so as people are trying to figure out what just happened. So making your meetings better, from a, purpose and decision-making perspective, so that way people know what they're supposed to do with the information, that will in many cases help resolve that meeting load issue, right?
Especially if I can just reflect on what you just said, because I can then imagine, okay, unclarity in the meeting, then you have all these side meetings popping up as you just explained, and then people come back to the next week's stand up. And then suddenly there's this elephant in the room because nobody, especially when we're remote, nobody knows what has been discussed outside of the meeting. So then you need extra time to bring this all together again and to maybe smoothen all the tension of those who didn't have these extra meetings.
Yep.
So, and then suddenly you have a new topic on your meeting that was not supposed to be there, which then results in even more meetings and even more one-on-ones. And then it's,
yes, it's a cascading effect.
Yeah.
That's what, so prior to COVID, I used to say we have a pandemic or an epidemic of meetings. I don't say that quite as often anymore because it has such a negative connotation now. But the issue is exactly what you said. It's where you get to that next meeting and 3 people are on the same page, the others are not, and now you have to bring everybody into the onto the same page. That's an additional agenda item that's not on the agenda that makes the meeting either run long, causing a ripple effect on the person's day, or another meeting so that way they can hit the other things that they don't get to on the agenda because they were catching everybody up on what happened after the last meeting.
Yeah.
Right. So you're exactly right. It just causes more meetings.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. So this was cure number 1, better meetings, better planned.
Yeah. Better meetings, better planned will actually reduce your meeting load. So taking 5 minutes to make your meeting more effective will mean you'll have fewer meetings the rest of the day. Yeah. Or the next day to try and clarify what was meant or not, whatnot. Yeah. That's one. There's several cures related to the meeting load issue, but that's one that I often talk about. The second one I mentioned was challenging personalities, and Bob, right? Yeah. Yes. And I apologize to anyone who listens to this and their name is Bob. I use Bob quite regularly, and I feel for those who have that wonderful name. It's a very good name. So anyway, monologuers or people who have challenging personalities. So that's a process issue, right? That's when you're in the meeting, you have your group of people that you're meeting with, and whether it's repeatedly or just a consistent issue where you got a monologuer or you have someone who just is difficult from a personality perspective, you have to figure out how to manage that, right? Because if you have an hour-long agenda, are you going to plan every week for 10-minute Bob? Is that what you need to do? I mean, that's an option, but that's really not a very effective option because it still means for 10 minutes, you're all going to have to zone out and check your email and things like that, just so that way you don't go crazy. And that's not effective. And so one of the number one things I prescribe for, 10-minute Bob or a challenging personality is procedural communication. Now, what is that? Well, assuming you have an agenda or a defined purpose for your meeting and can point to that, procedural communication allows you to say to Bob or to a person who's going off on a different topic or to a challenging personality who's questioning things to come back to the purpose at hand. Right. Oftentimes, with the monologuer, it's pretty easy to say, that's a good point. That's a great idea. But we're focused on this right now. Can you speak to that? Even give them the opportunity to speak to the issue at hand, because the person who's monologuing, that's fine. They're probably a smart person or you wouldn't have them on your team anyway. And so it's okay to have them talk about things. Just make sure it's about the thing you're actually trying to talk about. right? So procedural communication is okay. Bob's off on his monologue. Bob, that's a great point. Can you speak to this issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a procedural communication statement. Or people are in a what we call a complaining cycle. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's another form of collaborative monologuing, right? Where, oh, that's a horrible thing. Oh, yeah, I agree. You know why it's horrible? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I agree too. It's also horrible because, so you're complaining about this thing, right? And you're doing it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? Procedural communication would be, hey guys, I completely agree. That's a dumpster fire. Let's pull it back to this issue that we're talking about here. So again, procedural communication can be done in a very productive, kind, meaningful way that doesn't offend Bob, that doesn't upset the complaining cyclers, but brings it back to the purpose. And so that's one of the easiest and most comfortable ways to deal with those kinds of issues within the meeting.
Although I think that the origins of a Bob, sorry Bob, or the complainers are different, and I wonder whether there's maybe something to the core. So the complainers, I have the impression that there's something soothing about finding this confirmation in a complaint bubble. And what is it, what they actually need in order to find this unifying component that feels so good? It's us against the world. And we have known that this is so bad for so long, but nobody listens to us. And I've been saying this for 20 years already. And
no, complaining isn't in and of itself the problem. The problem arises when it becomes a cycle that carries on for a period of time, right? So we can get all the benefits of the unity that comes from, it's us against this horrible thing or this challenging thing that we've been dealing with forever. You can get all of that cohesion, which is an important thing for an effective team, to some extent for an effective meeting. You can get all of that within a couple of minutes, right? It's when you get to 5, 10, 15 minutes of just piling it on, right, to complaining. That's where it becomes a problem for the effectiveness of the meeting, because did you plan for a 5-minute complaining session or a 10-minute or 20-minute, 15-minute? Probably not, right? So assuming you have a plan with your meeting, which may be a large assumption for some people, those complaining cycles, that's when it becomes a problem, when it becomes a longer term process within the meeting. But you're absolutely right. The us against the world, the unity that can emerge from collaboratively recognizing a problem, right? Complaining together is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a wonderful lubricant, as it were, for cohesion within the meeting. But as a meeting leader or as an attendee, when you realize you've been doing this for a little bit longer than maybe is good for the flow of the meeting, it's important to kind of use that procedural communication to get it back to the topic at hand.
Exactly. And also it drags all the energy out. So yes, might we find a unifying factor that lifts us instead of draining us?
The unifying factor is nice, but you're right. The negative emotions of it's hopeless, right? This is a hopeless cause because of this thing. That is a drain, right? So you got to find that happy medium where, okay, it's a problem and we're in this together. That's great. But if it's a problem, we're in this together and we're all going to be miserable for it. That's not good. Yeah. That doesn't help the meeting. That just that derails the meeting and uses resources, from the individuals, instead of their brain power on the problem or the issue that you're discussing.
Yeah. And I was interrupting you again. So this was cure number 2.
Yes. So the third one, is stale meetings, right? Those meetings that are on our calendar and have been there forever, right? And we go to the meeting and they're repetitive and they don't move things forward. Okay. And so one of the things that I do, and this one is it kind of goes with number 1 as well, because one of the things I tell people is take a look at your calendar. What are your regularly scheduled weekly meetings? Okay. Do those have a strong purpose? Can you look at the one that's coming up next week and say, the purpose of this meeting is, and fill in the blank, and it be something more than updates? Because updates, we can do that so many more effective ways. Not that we necessarily want more email, but an email would do it. We could all just record a quick video. We got all these cameras. Why not record a quick video and say, hey, my update is, and take 30 seconds, give them an update, send it off, and you're done. Now everybody watches 5 minutes of video instead of an hour long of rambling updates, right? So the thing you have to do is look at your calendar of stale meetings, because everyone seems to have one or two on their calendar, sometimes have more, but we have one or two where it's kind of a catch up or a standing meeting or staff meeting or whatever. And think about what you can do to improve those, to create purpose in those meetings, because too often that's what's lacking, the purpose. We had a purpose when we started it, and it was meaningful, and it worked for a while, but then we've let it get stale. So, I encourage people, take a look at that and renew the purpose for which you were doing it, and maybe cancel it for a couple of weeks, or if you're looking ahead and say, I don't have anything new to discuss at our next staff meeting, let's cancel that. People are so thrilled when you cancel a meeting.
Yes.
It's like, they've given me back an hour of my life, right? I mean, it's amazing how good it feels when I can say I can cancel a meeting. It feels good. So make people feel good too.
And I wonder, and I might want to challenge that, because I think it depends on where you are in the hierarchy. So if there's, for instance, an assistant and it's the only meeting she has all week, because otherwise she's just replying to emails and doing whatever assistant work, administrative work. And then this one meeting gets canceled, is like, oh, I'm not important. I'm not going to be heard. And the other thing is that I think especially these standing meetings, they almost seem like alibi meetings, but people are not honest about it. So it's like, even for a couple, okay, let's have date night every Friday evening or every Thursday we have date night. And in the beginning you're excited and you try to be creative to make it something special. And suddenly you're just having dinner or you end up in front of Netflix every Thursday night, date night on Netflix. So, and then to be honest about the real purpose, okay, maybe it's just a team date. So maybe it's important for the team to meet once per week, just to have this feeling of coming together as a team. But then let's be honest about it, and let's not call it update or important team meeting, and let's make it shorter.
Yeah, I think both of the things you brought up there, the person who has one meeting a week, those people exist that have one meeting a week. It's not me, but there's lots of people in occupations where they only have one meeting a week, and that meeting has meaning for them. So that's important as well. And then you also bring up, the stale meeting. Maybe it's don't call it an update meeting. I think the key to this, and this is probably the primary thing I tell people on the third issue, is what is the purpose of the meeting? If you define the purpose of the meeting and you make it clear, and if it needs an agenda, it has an agenda that you follow, right? Then that refreshes it. That reminds you of the purpose for which you're meeting. That gets it going, gets you engaged. And then that person who has that one meeting will have a much more meaningful experience, right, in that meeting, right? And as well as that's a way to tackle the stale issue, which is it's stale because we've lost the meaning, we've lost the purpose, we've lost the reason for coming together. And so it's important to reestablish that purpose so that way it accomplishes what it needs to, and is there for those who don't have a lot of meetings as well as for those who do, that it actually accomplishes what it's intended to.
Hey, since you are listening to this podcast, I was wondering whether you get enough opportunities to exchange, practice, and experiment with other facilitators. Have you heard of the Never Done Before Facilitation Festival? It's a 24-hour global event that is co-created by its participants and delivered by some of the most popular Workshops Work podcast guests. Visit neverdonebefore.org for more information. Use the code WorkshopsWork to get a 20% discount. The festival starts as soon as you join. Now, back to the show.
What do you think have we learned from the switch to suddenly virtual about meetings? Do you think that meetings have improved, or did they got worse, or is there any learning? Maybe there's none.
So here's a fascinating thing, and the book that's coming out for or is out now. It's called Suddenly Virtual, and it's really about what have we learned and what can we do to make our remote meetings work. And you ask a fascinating question: there is, are our meetings better? And the answer is not really. they're about the same. And the reason I say that is about 80 to 90% of the things that we did before for face-to-face meetings, they still apply, right? The three things I just mentioned are the three pain points, right? And potential solutions. Did any of those defer if this was a face-to-face or if this was a virtual meeting?
I think they just become worse. It's an amplifier because now it's so easy to just schedule more meetings because it's a Zoom click away.
Yep. So it's layered on a set of new challenges and new opportunities, but those same problems exist, right? And so it's fascinating. And so I think the thing about meetings now is that they have the potential to be just as good, if not, and in fact, better than what they were before. Because one of the things that the data has shown so far is that, particularly earlier on in the pandemic, and it's kind of shifting back. We'll see how it goes, but people had more egalitarian conversations in these Zoom meetings because everyone had a representation on the screen. So if you had 5 people coming together, each one had a box. And what we found is that prior to the pandemic, depending on where you sat at the table, there were certain people who spoke more, right? Who had whether they were maybe they were the boss, maybe they weren't, but they seemed to be able to create more opportunity for themselves to contribute. Whereas with the virtual, there's no table. It's a screen, and everybody has an equal share of the screen because their boxes are all the same size unless you pin them or whatnot. And even then, we found this more equal in terms of the communication. So it's changed the way we meet in that way, and there's been more equal sharing, at least initially. Now, we're starting to see it kind of shift back. We're starting to see these hierarchical norms that humans like to create start to emerge once more in our virtual meetings, but at least initially, it was more equal.
Is it because, and I'm just thinking out loud, what I have observed, and I'm not too much into it, but that especially those who were higher in the hierarchy, so those who would have the prominent place in meetings, they also had the assistants who would prepare the room and prepare the coffee and everything. So they never had to take care of any of that. Suddenly, they're virtual and they have to do stuff with a monitor, with a screen behind the laptop. So there was a huge impact on their confidence. So maybe then this kind of, they found their space and maybe also comfort in just everyone is the same and nobody knows. And now after a year, they're back into, I know how this works now. I'm ready to take back my space.
There's something to be said for the novelty of virtual meetings, because initially, that's why it's fun to call the book's called Suddenly Virtual, because so many of us went from not using a webcam or a Zoom or a WebEx or whatever to using it all the time. So there was this novelty factor of it. There was this learning curve that required people who were not very tech savvy to suddenly required them to figure out how to use these things. And so I think initially some of that equality is, as you described, it was a lot of, okay, am I doing this right? Am I prepared? Am I doing, that sort of thing. And then as we've gotten more comfortable, the social norms and social cues that existed in the face-to-face environments have started to reemerge in the virtual environment. So it's fascinating in that way.
Yeah, and we kind of fall back into our old habits so easily. It's just
just like we talked about before, right? The reason our meetings rarely get better, even though we've heard 100 times we're supposed to have purposeful meetings that start and end on time, and yada, 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 I could go on. The reason we don't do all those things is because this is the way we've always done it, and it's worked okay. And the answer is, it's worked okay. Good. Are we okay with okay? Are we happy with that? Right?
Exactly.
And the answer should be no. Quality managers, people in any organization, nonprofit, government, for-profit or otherwise, should not be satisfied with just okay. And that's where our meetings were before the pandemic. That's kind of where they're landing during the pandemic, plus some additional challenges like turning on the camera, making sure your production value behind you is not distracting, trying to minimize the number of times the cat walks across the screen. All these wonderful things that we're dealing with now are new challenges that have the potential to derail the meeting effectiveness. And then there's opportunities. Think about the neat aspect of a window into people's homes and getting to know each other, right? Isn't it neat? I now know things about my colleagues that I never would have known otherwise, and they may never have told me, but we now know each other better simply because we have a window into each other's lives.
Yeah. And it's an opportunity to become more human.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one thing we talk about in the book in a couple of different places. Is one of the things that is nice about a co-located group in an organization, in an office, is that the human aspects of going and getting a cup of coffee together, or meeting at the water cooler, or bumping into each other as we are going from room to room, or going to get something from the copy machine, that sort of thing. Those are those human moments where we get to know each other. Hey, how are the kids? Oh yeah, well Bob, Bob. Sorry, Bob. They had a soccer game. It was great. We have those conversations. Well, in a suddenly virtual environment where we don't have those things, the window into each other's worlds, as it were, and encouraging people to have small talk and having conversations is really, really important, because we don't have those in our co-located environment because we're just not together.
Yeah. And this togetherness, how will it work when we go back? And especially now, hybrid is a new buzzword.
Yeah, it is.
When I hear hybrid, when I think of hybrid being some being in the office and some being remote, I personally believe that this is impossible, at least not if they're in the same call. But then there are more shades of hybrid. So
yes.
How can we go back to a new form of normal? And what works? What is hybrid?
Yeah. Well, hybrid is fascinating. So chapter 14 of the book is about hybrid meetings, where we're basically saying, this is what we think the new normal is going to look like, or this is what we think we're going to start seeing. And we talk about a few things in relation to how do we keep people engaged, how do we manage those environments, that sort of thing. And in interviews and articles that have been coming out about the book and about the research that I'm doing and that my co-author Karen Reed is doing, people have been asking this question: what about hybrid? What about hybrid? What about hybrid? And the neat thing about it is we were just invited to take chapter 14 and turn it into a book, because we're all going to be going to this hybrid situation, or many of us are going to be. And so what is hybrid? Hybrid is, and so this is how I would describe a hybrid meeting. You've got two people in a room, in the office over here. You've got three people in their separate, places, wherever they're at home or whatnot. You've got another three people from, across the pond, in another geographic location, and they're all connected through the internet, through webcams, that sort of thing. So now you've got, two people here, three people here, and then three individuals. The interesting thing about that is these two people are going to have a side conversation, probably. These three people are going to have side conversations as well. And these three people are going to be, wondering what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. And so the challenge with hybrid is it's not an intuitive format change, right? Face-to-face, everybody in the room, to face-to-face, everybody has one box. Mm-hmm. That's not too dramatic of a shift. It's a dramatic shift, but it's still kind of very similar, very parallel, because everyone has, a window.
We're in the same
Once
boat.
You start having, yeah, exactly. And they're remote or they're everyone, now we have some people that are face-to-face, some people are face-to-face, some people that are remote. That being able to facilitate, right, that environment to ensure that everybody has a voice, everybody participates, everybody communicates, and when the side conversations happen, that if it's related to the meeting, that those side conversations are brought into the dialogue within the virtual world. There's a skill set there. And it's a skill set that is not natural to a face-to-face or a virtual meeting. A hybrid meeting requires an attention, a situational awareness is what I would call a situational awareness that is higher and more challenging, I would say, than either of the other formats that we're most common and are most comfortable with.
So what are the traps that we can avoid through facilitation?
Yeah, so I'd say the number one thing would be those side conversations, the traps of either you getting engaged with the people in your room and forgetting that you have two people on the phone or two people on a screen or whatnot.
Which is so natural.
Okay? That is so natural. I have done that pre-pandemic in hybrid meetings. I have on multiple occasions forgotten about the people that are dialed in.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm not the only one. Maybe I am. I don't know. But but no, I'm not the only one. At least two. There you go. And so that's why I said situation winners. Being aware that you have other people and other connection points to the meeting. That's going to be a huge pitfall, and that's where we're going to need to train people on. Don't forget about all the people connected to your meeting right now.
So when I hear you saying that, which is totally, I can see this happening, I think is something that we cannot avoid just because we do feel attracted to the person next to us because they're close and we have this desire for turning to our neighbor to find confirmation. So would you then basically design that into a meeting to give them the space to recognize, okay, I know that you want to talk to your neighbor, so let's use 5 minutes, turn to your neighbor, and the 3 who are all remote go into a breakout room to do that?
Yeah, so as a facilitator, there are several things, as you know, that you could do to make this work, right? You could say, okay, I see we have 3 people here, 2 people here, and 3 people online. Let's put the 3 in the breakout, and we have this issue. I want everybody to discuss. You 2 discuss in your pod, you 3 discuss in your pod, and you 3 will discuss in a breakout room, right? And then we'll come back together and share, right? So that's a way to deal with it. If there's a discussion item that you want to have, the subgroups kind of have a conversation, right? That's one way to manage it. The other way is whoever the meeting leader is, to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to share their thoughts and ideas. Right. Again, it goes back to that participation. This is particularly important for meetings where there's collaboration required, there's a decision to be made, and you need input from everybody. Right. If it's a presentation, it's a different situation. But in those collaborative environments, you've got to make sure that everybody has a chance to share their thought or idea, and to not fall into the trap of the subgroups having their own meeting and the people online not participating.
And then I wonder whether, especially during these everyone is remote or virtual era we are living in, the issue of the filter bubble gets even more important, that we surround ourselves with our own ideas, and then we don't get enough challenges because the algorithm work like that. And if then I imagine that if we follow the road of least resistance, okay, the 3 who are together are one natural breakout room, and you're going to discuss. And then we cannot take advantage of this cross-pollination. How do you say?
Pollinization.
Thank you.
Pollinization. Yep.
I let you say the word. Of different groups at different spaces to really challenge each other.
Yeah, it does. You're right. That's one of the downsides of that is if you allow the natural groups to emerge based on what we just described, then that's why you have to come back and share. And again, that goes back to that facilitation aspect of it, or that encouragement of participation aspect of it. During the pandemic, there's been a few times, because I do work with all different types of groups. So I've worked with firefighters, I've worked with healthcare professionals, I've worked with, for-profit tech firms, that sort of thing. And depending on the nature of those groups, some of them are still coming together regularly. Like firefighters are still coming together regularly because they have to respond to emergencies in a variety of ways.
They do.
And so I was literally on a call in a hybrid meeting where there was a group of firefighters, like 4 or 5 at a table in one screen. There was 2 or 3 on another table on another screen. And then there were 2 or 3, there was, I think, 4 or 5 of us that were individual boxes. And as I was there, I had a lesser role in the meeting, which was good because I could think about what this was all meaning. And what was fascinating to me was that each of the boxes on the screen seemed to participate equally, right? Even though one box had 5 people, another box had 3, and then another bunch of boxes had 1, right? And so the participation was somehow linked to the number of cameras as opposed to number of people. So that's another facilitation thing to think about, right? If you're a facilitator and you've got a box that's got 4 people and a box that's got 2 people and a box that's got 3 people and a box, there should be participation ought to be a bit more for the box that has 4 people than for a box that has 1, right? If that sort of thing. And so those are interesting oddities that I started to notice as we've been in this virtual and starting to be hybrid situation.
What was going on in my brain while I was listening to you is, on the one hand, doesn't the fourth person or fifth person in this one box also want to share something and participate. But then, on the other hand, the problem we have with non-participating people on the call is that they would zone out and start writing emails or being distracted. Whereas if you're with 5 people in front of a screen participating in the same meeting, there's a kind of peer pressure that would still keep everyone's energy in this expanded room. So maybe then it's not that important as a facilitator to really, as you described, and I've never thought about it, to really include every individual, but to give every box a space.
Yeah. And the reality is we don't have an answer scientifically to that, because pre-pandemic, hybrid meetings were a novelty to some extent. Now, we did have them, but they didn't happen often enough for most of us in order for us to figure out some of these things, right? And what we're starting to see here in our conversation is this is a challenging environment, right? Now you got all these different potential formats. It's not just everybody has a camera or everybody's around the table. Now you've got all these different potential communication networks networked together through the network, right? And so it creates a lot of complexity that some consultants that I know in the meeting space have actually been telling the people, don't do hybrid. Just tell everybody to go to their office and do a virtual meeting. If not everybody could be in the room, nobody should be in the room. And I disagree with that, because I think we are smart, capable people, and we can make hybrid meetings work. And in fact, they might even end up being the best way for us to bring groups of groups together. But I think anyone who just assumes that, oh yeah, I can do hybrid, I've got this down, doesn't realize how complex it is. And so my advice to organizations right now is you really need, unlike the suddenly virtual where, oh crap, we have a pandemic, everybody go home. So essentially everyone was suddenly remote, everybody had to do virtual, and there was no time to prepare. And that's why there was a run on cameras, there was a run on mice, there were a run on chairs, there's a run on stuff to set up in a home office, because we didn't have time. We actually are in a good space. And my advice to organizations, to managers, to leaders, to et cetera, would be to start now to seek out training, seek out ways to prepare yourself and your workforce for the hybrid meeting, because we have a moment to do that. There are facilitation courses that will help in a lot of ways. There's the work that I do that hopefully will be helpful for some. There's work that others do that will be helpful. Seek out the training now, so that way when we are in this fully hybrid remote kind of combo environment, which is coming, and is already arrived for some of us, which is coming, we'll be more prepared.
And I wonder whether we are already, and I don't think so, because it seems as if, or in my experience, from on-site to virtual, we had to become so much more explicit in to give directions, to facilitate, to make sure that everyone knows what they have to do once they go into the breakout, or once we have we need to have these conversation protocols in an on-site meeting. We would never tell people, okay, you go in a group and you're going to speak first and you're going to take notes and you do the timekeeping, right? We would never do that. Now, virtually, we do. And it seems when I listen to you on how to make these hybrid meetings work, and I must admit, I'm guilty. I'm one of them who said, okay, if some are in the office and some are online, put everyone behind the screen and meet for coffee in the break. Because I think it sounds as if it even needs more direction and more explicitity and more facilitation and more guidance and rules.
Yeah, I mean, because there's so many different potential formats, right? With a hybrid, the sky's the limit when it comes to the number of different potential formats. 5 here, 3 there, 2 here, 1, 1, 1. You could just kind of, like we could rattle off 100 different formats potentially. And every time you change the format a little bit and the dynamics and the personalities and so forth, it's another potential network of communication that will emerge. And so, I anticipate organizations who are going to embrace hybrid, which I think many of them will try, if they don't do something to prepare their people to learn how to facilitate, they're going to see meetings are going like this. They're going to see a dip. They're going to be like, wow, our meetings are really crappy now. And then over time, people will start to figure it out. Well, just like with virtual meetings, I think there was a little bit of a dip. Like you were saying, there was more direction. You're going to go to a breakout room and you're going to talk, and then there was more direction that needed to happen. And I think it took us a little less time than I think it will for hybrid situations to get to the point where we are directing traffic in the right way and creating environments that are collaborative and that are effective in the hybrid situation. So I think I anticipate there being more of a skills gap in going into the hybrid setting than there was going into the virtual meeting setting.
Yeah, because we haven't caught up with the virtual skills yet.
Yeah.
And again, there's another change.
Yep.
What makes a meeting fail?
Well, we talked about a few things that are symptoms of challenges in meetings, but I think one of the biggest things that cause a meeting to fail is the lack of purpose and then not setting the stage properly. So one of my first studies, I looked at, okay, how can a manager make a meeting so good that it causes their employees to engage more, it causes them to be higher in employee engagement. I want to say, what is it that's going to make them be excited and ready to go do their work, right? And I looked at like 25 different things, and it came down to 3, and one of them stuck out like a sore thumb. One was relevance, meeting purpose, right? Having a meeting that's relevant to me is much more likely to engage me than a meeting that's irrelevant to me. Big surprise. Second thing was voice behaviors. A meeting where I have the opportunity to share my thoughts, ideas, opinions, and they're listened to and I'm seen. It's going to make me much more likely to be engaged as an employee. And the third thing, which I actually spent a lot of time studying recently, in the last few years, because it was just weird that it came out to be such a powerful connection to engagement, was meeting time courtesy. So what do I mean by that? It means starting on time, it means ending on time, and it means scheduling meetings at a time that is not disruptive. So the 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon is not time courteous, right? Or starting 10 minutes, 15 minutes late is not time courteous. So of those 3, the one that was strongest in its relationship to engagement was meeting time courtesy, which I was like, why? Why is time so important to people? I don't understand. And so that's why I spent, the better part of the last decade always having at least one study I was working on where I was looking at time issues in the meeting.
And it makes, now that you say it, I wouldn't have come up with it, but now that you say
I didn't.
It makes so much sense, especially back. So time courtesy is, if you see in my calendar that my meeting ends at 3, don't schedule a next meeting at 3.
Yeah.
Right? Just because you see half an hour block, don't take this half an hour away from me. That puts me into stress because we know that meetings might run over time and then I have to rush into the next one. And so you start the meeting stressed and with kind of a frustration.
Yeah, absolutely. So because I've been studying this time thing so much, what you just said there is exactly something that I just have data that I'm working on publishing right now on meetings about right-sizing them. In other words, we often have a really messy calendar when we have back-to-back meetings, right? So when you go from 1 hour meeting to 1 hour meeting to 1 hour meeting to 1 hour meeting, invariably you are running late to one of those meetings. Or worse, it's a virtual environment that you feel more pressure to be on time, and so you don't get a chance to get a beverage, find the restroom, maybe get lunch. So these back-to-back meetings are killing us. They really are. From a human perspective, human well-being perspective, they're really bad. And so one of the things that I was looking at is, okay, what do we do about this? And what the data is saying is that if you reduce your 60-minute meetings to 50 minutes and your 30-minute meeting to 25 minutes, you get some recovery. We found that after a good meeting, people need 5 minutes to recover. A good meeting, you need 5 minutes to recover. And this is not because it was a bad meeting. This is because neurologically, to switch topics, to go into the next thing, whether it's a meeting or other work, we need about 5 minutes to be, okay, that was that meeting. Here's what I need to keep from that. Okay, transition, right? We need that.
And I mean, research has shown that if we get distracted or if we try to multitask, it takes us 20 minutes to come back into the same flow we had. So we know this about our own focused work. Why don't we apply this knowledge to meetings? If I get out of a meeting, it takes me at least 20 minutes to get into the flow of the next topic with new people, with a new environment, new dynamics.
You know, I often use the example of passing periods in secondary education and primary school and that sort of thing. So when, our children often have a class in math, and then they go and they have 10 minutes in between that class and their class in science or whatnot, right? That's how we do it. One of the reasons for that is they're moving from one place to another. Mm-hmm. But psychologically, neurologically speaking, the reason that exists is they need an opportunity to cognitively switch from this topic over here to this topic over here. Yeah. That need doesn't go away just because you get older. In fact, it actually gets worse. Yeah. We need even more time because we have that much more stuck in our brains that we're trying to keep track of. Yeah. So that was a fascinating new thing. There's a study that's under review at a journal right now that basically says we need meeting recovery time. We need time between our meetings to recover. And then for years, I've been telling people, you need to prepare for your meetings. You need to come to your meeting ready to talk about the thing you're going to talk about. And yet, have we been giving people the opportunity to prepare?
Is there time to prepare? Yeah.
Have we been giving them 3 or 4 minutes just to say, here's what the purpose of the meeting is. Think about it for a minute before we dive into it. Yeah. And so to some extent, I've been telling people, if you're in back-to-back meetings and you don't see a way to change that, if you're a meeting leader or a facilitator, when everybody comes to the room or when everyone gets online, just say, let's take 3 or 4 minutes. The purpose of the meeting today is this. Now, take a minute, take a deep breath, grab a beverage if you need it, whatever. Come back and let's dive into the topic, introducing some humanity into our insanity.
I love it. If someone, for any reason, after minute 2 fell asleep and doesn't have time to listen to the entire conversation again, what would you like them to take away from it?
From our conversation today? Mm-hmm. I think the main thing I want them to take away from it is that meetings can be better. And most of the things that would make them better, you already know what you need to do. So just do it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your research with us, your experience, giving me some hope for hybrid meetings.
I will try that. They're gonna be great. We just need to learn a little bit, on how to do them. So,
and I put the link to your book in the show notes.
Great.
And so that people can reach out and read more.
Yeah, and I hope people find it, read it. I'd love to get some feedback. I'd love to hear how people are engaging with it, because the point is not to sell a ton of books. The point is to get the knowledge to the people that want it and that can help them have better meetings and have a better work life and a better life balance. I think that's the goal.
Be careful what you wish for. Otherwise, you are jobless. If all the meetings are great, what is a meeting scientist doing?
That would be a perfect world for me. I would be okay with studying something else.
Happy to retire.
Happy to retire. That's right. So
wonderful.
Thanks for inviting me. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.